we're headed under the sea with Mermaid Melissa to discuss her extraordinary, one-of-a-kind dedication to an aquatic lifestyle. Mermaid Melissa makes a splash. Real-life Mermaid Melissa is known for traveling across the oceans, entertaining at live mermaid events, mermaid shows, and underwater mermaid sightings to raise awareness for ocean conservation by swimming with marine mammals worldwide. Melissa promotes ocean education through underwater entertainment at all mermaid fundraisers, events, and live appearances. And Melissa, this is very much your work, and it's also an art form. At what point did you decide to be a mermaid?
Well, when I was a kid, I definitely didn't think I would grow up and get to be a mermaid. I mean, when you think about that type of lifestyle, it just doesn't seem possible. But I believe that my passion for marine conservation and absolutely adoring dolphins growing up and all sea creatures, it seemed only a matter of time before it took shape. I just didn't think that the career would end up being actually in the shape of a mermaid.
Well, Melissa, we all fell in love with Ariel from The Little Mermaid, the movie, and at some point we've all pretended to flip our fins in a swimming pool. How does pop culture play into our fascination with mermaids?
You know, that's a great question. When I was growing up and watching The Little Mermaid, it definitely was one of those movies that does influence you as a child. You know, the songs get caught in your head. Disney just has a great way of reaching the children and it becoming a part of all of our lives by watching the movies. And for me, watching Little Mermaid, you know, when I was in the pool, you would like sing the songs and like think to yourself, like, how great would it be to be part of Ariel's world? You know, every little girl actually dreams of being like a princess usually, but for me, pop culture more tied into wanting more of the fantasy of being under the water. So as a kid, it started off where almost like an evolution where they'd call me Fish Girl, then they'd be like, oh, there's Dolphin Girl, and eventually I got the nickname Mermaid Melissa, which I decided to take to a whole other level.
It's fantastic. And, you know, of course, Ariel, she's a cartoon, but then we got that movie with Tom Hanks and Daryl Hannah in the late 80s, and it was called Splash, and I think a lot of people probably remember this, and it was really our first look at what a real mermaid would look like.
Yeah, in fact, you know, I was just reading an article about Daryl Hannah and her experience, you know, working on that, and she was talking about how it could take up to 8 hours to have that tail put on and all the details, and that they would have to glue it on her and hand paint, you know, extra scales to make it blend. And that's just amazing just to think how far we progressed with, you know, even special effects and taking it to a whole different level where now I actually get to make a living as being a mermaid. You know, for her, it was something that was a dedication for that movie role, and it did play a huge influence on me, seeing that movie, just, again, being inspired by, wow, like, that looks so real. And now, you know, that's kind of like the standard that I look for when I think back to those classics of watching her in Splash. She's an inspiration, you know, and I hope now in modern times that maybe I can be an inspiration for both women and men that, you know, if I can make my living as a professional real-life mermaid, they can do anything.
And folks, if you're just joining us, we are on the telephone with real-life mermaid Melissa, and we're just chatting a little bit about what it's like to live under the sea, so to speak, in a career, which is just so fascinating. And I imagine, Melissa, being a mermaid has its challenges. What are some of those challenges, and how in the world do you train to be a mermaid?
You know, it's really tough to be a mermaid. You'd think it'd be easy because the end result is all that everyone gets to see. You know, they see the final finished product of the pictures that are released or the final edit of the videos that are put out on my YouTube channel. But being a mermaid takes a lot more than just putting on a fishtail. For me, it's a full-time lifestyle. It's blood, sweat, and mermaid tears go into my business. For example, it might sound really small, but they all add up. I get ear infections. I've, you know, dealt with, you know, having to be careful not to even get asthma because a lot of what I do is breath holding skills, and you really have to take care of your heart and your lungs when you're performing underwater for minutes at a time. So it's like an athlete. I train my body. I train even my mind to get calm under the water. A lot of people are very scared and have phobia and fear of the water. And when they get underwater, they get really scared and they want to come up right away. But for me, ever since I was a child, it was kind of like sink or swim. I remember all my pictures of being a kid are me in the pool or at the beach surfing, exploring the ocean. I grew up right on the beach. So for me, it was like a hobby that turned into a passion. So now, thankfully, from growing up by the water, that's what helps my skills now to performing for hours at a time underwater. And I definitely credit being a freediver helping my skills selling the real-life mermaid image because my longest breath hold is 5 minutes. Wow. And that's something that you can lose very quickly if you do not maintain it. So that's not something that I would encourage others to try. It's definitely something that is a trained skill that you have to do with a lot of years of practice. And
does the tail actually aid you? How does that affect the way that you swim while you're underwater?
Well, they have what's called monofins, and these are almost like instead of two flippers, it's one big fin that kind of looks like a dolphin's tail. And that monofin can help you propel yourself through the water. A lot of freedivers will use this. So when you think of a mermaid tail, that's kind of what's attached. But the difference between that and my tail is that mine has so many extra features on it to give that realistic look that it makes it actually sometimes hard to swim in the water with it because as much as once I get the momentum going, I am getting great propulsion. Over the years, I've definitely had to tweak what works and what doesn't because they can be up to 60 pounds. And on land, it's really heavy. I'll pose sometimes for events and I'm on land for hours and I get out and I'm just, dying, it's like indentated with the pose I've been holding forever, like yoga. But I would say in the beginning, you could definitely see the progression of my first few YouTube videos where I was more having to use my arms to help me through the water because the tail looks gorgeous. But in the beginning, I wasn't really getting a lot of propulsion. And it's funny because it's almost like evolution. I've been growing and learning and my tails have been changing for the better. I'm pretty proud with how realistic it's looking.
You're very often swimming right alongside sharks and stingrays as well as other sea life. Do they just kind of perceive you as one of them?
Well, I can't really pretend to know what they're thinking, but what I'd like to think is that I'm as close to being a creature of the sea as them, that they kind of accept me. I try to leave them alone as much as possible. There's some creatures where, you can tell they're a little bit more used to people and they don't mind the interaction. But especially with manatees, my experience swimming with them is I definitely try to promote, if you keep your distance and admire from afar. I find that even in one of my videos with the manatees, they ended up approaching me. And I think it's because they were so used to people being aggressively approaching them to pet them because they're so cute and you want to go over and touch them. But by giving them respect, they actually came over to me and were, almost like trying to pet me, which is really hilarious. They reached out, they were nuzzling. One of them was even kissing me on the face. It was just so adorable and kind of a life-changing moment when you have those type of interactions with marine mammals, which is what has encouraged me to show and share with the world these experiences that I've had with these animals.
I love so much, Melissa, that you are doing this to promote and educate people on preservation of sea life. Why is it so important for people to know about this?
Well, as humans, we're kind of landlocked and we kind of get in that mindset of just being on the computer every day and the daily grind. And it's easy to forget that there's a whole other world that has not been explored. So much of the ocean is yet to be discovered. And imagine the things that we're going to find as we learn and as we grow in society. And I just think that it's worth preserving, and it's easy to overlook the damage that we do daily that affects, our ecosystem. And, besides the polar caps melting and all of these things, it's something to just keep awareness of. And I definitely think that through, entertainment, you can more have an impact, a positive way of spinning promotion of education to save our oceans, because there's a lot of dreary ways that people tend to throw it in your face of all the negative ways that we've been hurting animals and everything, and that is very true. But for my personal experience to reach out to children and to have a lasting impact, I'm more spin the positive aspects of this is what you can do to make a change. This is the great ways, simple ways that you can just walk on the beach and, people will see you cleaning up the beach. They'll be inspired. They'll want to get their children involved to help out. And those are the ways that I want to make a difference by spreading a positive way that we can all, reach out and help animals of the ocean.
And folks, if you'd like to find out more information on Mermaid Melissa, you can view her stunning underwater photos, videos,